you'll immediately spot the impact of RT reflections to start. The overcast afternoon sky is more accurately reflected across the glossy surface of the car and even the driver's helmet. Each surface is more thoroughly lit in daylight as it would.
F124 is one of the games on the PS5 Pro that I'm really looking forward to, so looking forward to this ray tracing and PSSR test. So let's jump straight in.
Developer Codemasters makes its first push for PlayStation 5 Pro support with an update to F124, a release that adds ray tracing upgrades and integrates the machine's PSSR upscaling. Of course, F124 already has an impressive set of modes on the regular base PS5, the quality and performance modes, where the latter lets us play at 120 frames per second. These two options are essentially kept in place in the game's graphics menu while playing on PS5 Pro, but with a range of enhancements on each. Plus, there's a new 8K resolution mode on PS5 Pro, unlocking once a compatible display is attached. We had a chance to go hands-on with all three options at Codemasters HQ, using a PS5 Pro dev kit and returning with the video capture you see here. And
well, that's nice, so they're getting to actually have a proper hands-on using those three different modes, but I'm still finding the 8K thing a little bit pointless, because obviously it's going to be upscaled, but this is what PSSR is all about to a degree. But yes, interested to see the 120 frames per second mode as well, which is going to be interesting to see in those ray traced reflections.
And returning with the video capture you see here. And while this pre-final build is in the last stages of polish, the outlook is positive for when the hardware launches on November 7th. Going through each mode in turn then, how drastic are the Pro visual upgrades when compared to a base PS5? Notably, looking at the 4K 60fps quality mode, where ray tracing is added for actual gameplay. Also, how convincing is the PSSR upscaling in that quality mode, in reconstructing to a 4K image? And lastly, focusing on the quality and performance modes today, how well does either option hold to their frame rate targets, at 60fps on quality mode or 120 on performance? Let's find out.
Just a quick thing I'd like to say on these videos is, you'll notice sometimes they slow things down or they zoom in. This isn't because the differences are hard to notice. Quite often they're very obvious differences. The reason why they slow things down is because YouTube compression completely destroys the actual image quality of what you'll see in real life. Same with the zoom. It's like due to the compressed nature of a YouTube video, which makes it look far worse than it does in real life, that they zoom in just to show the differences. The difference is going to be very apparent in real life when you actually play the game on the actual console.
First up is PS5 Pro's quality mode, where the key breakthrough is that ray tracing is now enabled during the on-track gameplay.
Nice.
It's a big upgrade over the base PS5's approach running on its own quality mode here, where ray tracing only ever enabled for pre-race moments and replays. Once we go to the starting grid on base PS5, we immediately switch to the conventional rasterized techniques for reflections, shadows and ambient occlusion. The PS5 Pro update changes all of this, in large part thanks to the leeway afforded by its more powerful GPU, a 67% increase in compute units, and 28% boost in memory speeds. It's now possible to include 3 ray tracing options during the race itself, all while still running at 60 frames per second.
Yes!
In order, we get ray traced reflections, including opaque materials like glass. We get ray-traced ambient occlusion for more realistic, indirect shading.
Good.
And finally, there's dynamic diffuse global illumination, or DDGI, allowing for simulated light bounce between surfaces. The one RT option missing during gameplay though is ray-traced shadows, though this does enable during in-engine cinematics.
To be honest, I would rather have those options there and lose the shadows as one of the options. It's probably going to be the least noticeable out of the ray tracing effect. So drop in the shadows for me is the most sensible option there, if one of them had to be dropped to keep the frame rate good and the quality high. So yeah, that's quite promising so far.
Though this does enable during in-engine cinematics. In comparing the base PS5 directly to PS5 Pro, the ray tracing upgrade is a substantial one. Using the TV pod camera view, you'll immediately spot the impact of RT reflections to start. The overcast afternoon sky is more accurately reflected across the glossy surface of the car, and even the driver's helmet. Each surface is more thoroughly lit in daylight as it would be in a real-life race.
Oh, sorry, I'm just being very, very immature there, but it's the way he said it. I'll have to kind of hear that bit again. Ray traced helmet. I know. I'm not 14, honestly. But you can clearly see it on the... it is a better looking image on the right hand side. Very nice.
Each surface is more thoroughly lit in daylight as it would be in a real-life race. Now, the other classic example of ray traced reflections...
Didn't go back far enough. Sorry, got to hear that again.
Even the driver's helmet. Each surface is more thoroughly lit in daylight as it would be in a real-life race. Now, the other classic example of ray traced reflections is across wet track surfaces. The base PS5 uses the screen space method, of course, SSR, to draw reflections, where every roadside barrier and overhead billboard is often vibrantly mirrored across the tarmac. Except the resulting reflection is often exaggerated. SSR works well here, but it doesn't simulate the way real-life light reacts, and crucially diffuses across rough surfaces. The material reaction is too clean in the mirroring of elements above the track. What we have with PS5 Pro's ray tracing method, on the other hand, is more true to life in factoring in the way light hits the coarse material properties of the road. It works much like the PC version maxed out. The impact of light from roadside barriers is undeniably subtler with ray tracing engaged, but still, overall, PS5 Pro offers a more natural result via RT.
That is important to note that, he said, more natural. The thing is, some effects, especially on these kind of games sometimes, are exaggerated to make people notice them, but it's not actually how you see things in real life. Those colours aren't as bright as that, they're not as vibrant as that, they're not as bold as that, and that is not realistic. The thing is with ray tracing is it makes your eyes perceive light as it is in real life to a certain degree, so when it's done properly it will be a far more subtle effect. So you have to bear that in mind. It's not going to be as obvious as what some people may expect.
Engaged, but still, overall, PS5 Pro offers a more natural result via RT.
It does look nice. More natural, more lifelike.
Next along is the impact of ray-traced ambient occlusion, the indirect shading in and around the car and track. As ever with anything shading related, this one stands out best in switching directly between PS5 in full screen and then going to PS5 Pro. Note how the underside of the car produces a thicker blanket of shade using PS5 Pro's ray-traced approach. Likewise, trackside details like barriers and even the palm trees beyond the circuit are now more thoroughly shaded, where the floodlights logically don't quite reach. It makes for a huge difference, and not just at night. Racing through the Azerbaijan circuit around dusk, the waning sunlight is better simulated with PS5 Pro's RTAO. Its barriers are darkened all the way up this first straight, while the base PS5's details looks
far more realistic. A lot of people may say in a racing game, where you're driving at high speeds, concentrating on what you're doing, you're not going to notice this stuff, but I'm pretty sure you will. Because a lot of this stuff happens almost in your subconscious viewing, the way you just see things and perceive things. And it just looks so much more realistic. That shading, as you said there on the left-hand side one on the PS5 quality mode, as if there's lights all the way along the track. But on the quality mode on the Pro, it's much more subtle, but far more realistic. This is really, really promising so far.
Pro's RTAO. Its barriers are darkened all the way up this first straight, while the base PS5's details look almost artificially bright.
Yeah.
We get an altogether richer, more natural pass of shade that beds in every point of the track ahead, and even cockpit details. Finally, we also have PS5 Pro's DDGI, the Dynamic Diffuse Global Illumination. Previously, this was best shown off on base PS5 around the car showrooms of the main menu, running at 30 FPS, but never in gameplay. On PS5 Pro, switching back and forth with the base model, we see the tunnel of the Monaco track noticeably bouncing colour, that dark brown hue around the arch and back onto the car. Again, there are no RT shadows here, but the combination of RTAO and GI has a major effect on closed spaces like this. To make ray tracing possible in the quality mode, an adjustment is made with PS5 Pro's approach in generating a 4K image. Engaging all these ray tracing features at 4K resolution and at 60 frames per second no less is a big ask after all, and so Codemasters has found a way to rebalance the rendering load, GPU side. In short, PS5 Pro leans heavily on Sony's PSSR to achieve a 4K image via reconstruction. The actual native resolution is changed compared to a base PS5, which typically runs at a dynamic 4K with drops to 1800p. In PS5 Pro's case, the native resolution is lowered to a range of 1440p to 1080p lowest instead, always adjusting based on rendering load and the demands of ray tracing on each track. To pick one example, pixel tests on a complex stage like Monaco come in at 1224p, or 56% scale of 4K, but that does go higher and lower. PSSR saves the day here. There are enough raw pixels to work with to resolve the track and car details to a surprisingly comparable 4K result.
Now, the reason why PSSR I think is going to be really, really good on the PS5 is because players who use consoles don't actually rely on native resolution as much as, say, PC users. A lot of PC users are really critical about things not being in native 4K resolution, for example, but the reason is they sit that much closer to the screen. They're often 1 or 2 foot away from the monitor, which is like really, really close, so you can actually, your eyes can resolve that detail from that distance, so you may actually notice the difference between a native resolution and something like the PSSR. Most console users, I'm guessing, sit 6 to 8 feet away from the screen on average, and the human eye can't resolve that detail unless you've got like some bionic eyes of a hawk or something. But for the most part, most people from a normal viewing distance will not notice the difference between good PSSR and native resolution. So for me, if PSSR was used properly, it can be a really, really good thing.
In pure image quality terms, this PSSR reconstruction ends up coming close to the base PS5's native 1800p to 4K image. There are inevitably some limits though, as a result of upscaling from a lower base native resolution. Notably, there's breakup on fine sub-pixel details in motion, like the fences and meshes, which so often tend to challenge reconstruction technologies like FSR or DLSS. Likewise, there is some light visual noise, flicker to road markings while accelerating forward. Temporal breakup is possible with PSSR then, but most of the image outside of these elements resolve to a convincing 4K result. It recreates a 4K pixel structure for track geometry and the car itself. So in the PS5 Pro's bid to include the taxing ray tracing features during gameplay itself, it's a trade-off, though the use of PSSR is a smart one in aiming to still maintain the quality mode's 4K 60fps output.
60 FPS minimum for me.
Frame rate testing is up next, and despite the addition of ray tracing, the good news is that quality mode 60 FPS lock isn't affected. In the heat of a race, 99% of play runs absolutely flawlessly, from the Azerbaijan route to the Albert Park circuit during rainfall. As an extreme case, of course, Monaco in heavy rain is the real litmus test, and here it almost passes with flying colours. With all AI cars in view at the starting grid, PS5 Pro does briefly drop to 58 FPS to start, with full screen tearing. It's a momentary drop though, and once we splinter away from the pack, 60 FPS is in the frame again. Now, the only other issue on this track is the occasional hitches in this pre-final build we tested on the Pro debug unit. The clusters of dropped frames at certain turns. Speaking to Codemasters directly, the team is well aware of this issue though, and aims to address it ahead of the PS5 Pro patch rolling out. Besides that, every other circuit flies at 60 FPS with ray tracing engaged. It's optimized well for 60 FPS on PS5 Pro, which is really a testament to the careful choice of included ray tracing technologies. And
just thinking that is absolutely spot on. Really looking forward to this. The fact that Monaco, under heavy rain, only at the start is the slight drop in FPS below 60, means that they've actually pretty much nailed it bang on, because not too many people can be bothered about that minor drop on one circuit in heavy rain for a few seconds at the start. And apart from that, it's going to be 60 frames all the way. So for me, they've absolutely nailed that. Great stuff.
a testament to the careful choice of included ray tracing technologies and the use of PSSR as a means to strike a 4K image while also not losing out on the frame rate side.
60 FPS, ray tracing, nice graphics.
Looking beyond the gameplay, PS5 Pro still caps its frame rate during scripted, pre-race build-ups and replays. The crucial change being that the sequences now cap at 40 frames per second, rather than the 30 FPS on base PS5. So for example, this camera flyover across the Monaco track runs at a flat 40 FPS cap to begin with. Once we zoom into each racer though, on the grid, PS5 Pro starts to drop well into the mid-30s with heavy screen tearing in tow. Likewise, the replays and post-race celebrations all run at a wavering 30 to 40 FPS on PS5 Pro. It's a similar range of behaviours to the base PS5 then, just with a higher frame rate ceiling of 40 FPS. Also, much like on base PS5, ending a race will even briefly have the AI take control of your car while leaving the frame rate to run entirely unlocked. In this case, we get a range of 40 to 60 FPS with screen tearing. So, in summary, all of the curious frame rate behaviour around a race, the build-ups and replays, are still blighted by drops and tearing on PS5 Pro, but they do tend to run at a higher frame rate overall. Moving on, the performance mode, allowing for gameplay at 120Hz, offers a more conservative but still worthwhile upgrade on PS5 Pro. The final target resolution is 4K here, but the technology used to get to 4K at 120 frames per second differs from the quality mode.
Whoever's driving is shocking.
Performance mode runs at a dynamic 1440p, though drops under that figure are rare. It's typically a static 2560 by 1440. Already, in this sense, we're getting an upgrade over the base PS5's 1080p to 1440p range in its own performance mode, which more aggressively tucked into that dynamic resolution. Secondly, PS5 Pro's performance mode also depends on the temporal anti-aliasing upsampling mode, or TAAU, rather than the PSSR upscaling of the quality mode. The results overall are still impressive, and TAAU's only limit is at times in resolving fine detail in motion, like the lettering of roadside adverts while zoomed in here. The issue manifests as a very occasional flicker on these elements as we accelerate, but we're still getting a decent 4K resolve otherwise. Also, you might have noticed in this side-by-side comparison with base PS5, the other major difference is in reflections. Codemasters confirms that no ray tracing is included in this mode on PS5 Pro, and so RTAO, DDGI and RT reflections are disabled. Rather, and again speaking with the team for clarification, planar reflections are used instead on its 120Hz mode, essentially re-rendering the track geometry within the reflected surface.
Okay, so it's nice to have that option. For me, I'm not an elite racer by any stretch of the imagination, so 60 Hz for me with the ray tracing effects on, 60 frames per second is going to be the way I go about it, because I'm not going to be troubling the top of the leaderboards. But those people that actually are very, very good racers and are capable of some crazy times which normal folk look at and think, how on earth did you get another 1.5 seconds a lap better than me? It's like, just how? Kind of thing. They're the ones that are going to notice every single twitch of the car, and that 120 frames a second for those elite lap times is going to be what that's all about. And those people aren't going to be bothered too much about ray traced reflections. All they're bothered about is lap times. So for normal people, like me, I'm quite happy to have the 60 frames a second with all those effects on.
Essentially re-rendering the track geometry within the reflected surface. It's a still computationally expensive approach, and as a fallback, there's track surface texturing, cube maps, both of which combine to achieve a realistic track reflection without resorting to ray tracing or the SSR method on base PS5.
Okay.
Testing PS5 Pro's frame rate at 120 FPS, the turnout is again capably hitting the mark. On every track tested so far, there's barely a blip en route, even including the Monaco circuit as our extreme stress test. That said, there are some exceptions. Turning into a pit stop for repairs triggers a minor bout of frame drops to 115 FPS lowest with full screen tearing. There's also very occasional one-frame drops during gameplay, but nothing that massively detracts from the experience. And, once again, Performance Mode has an odd set of behaviours during pre-race sequences and replays. Generally, these lock at a 40 FPS cap, much like the Quality Mode, but ending or retiring from a race will trigger the engine to run fully unlocked to 120 FPS. Much like on base PS5, these automated post-race moments engage ray tracing for ambient occlusion, reflections, and DDGI. The net result being that we get to see, even if just briefly, how PS5 Pro might run with these RT technologies with a 120 FPS target. The reality is that we're hovering at the 70 to 90 FPS range, and that being the case, disabling these options for gameplay itself turns out to be a sensible call. A final note on the new 8K resolution mode. Alas, we couldn't capture PS5 Pro at 8K this time around, though we did see it on an 8K display. The idea is, you set the PS5 Pro at a system level to output at 8K, and from there, a new option unlocks on the F124 menus in-game, much like with the console's 120Hz functionality. This forces the game to render at a native 4K, which is then upscaled using the Ego Engine's TAAU to create an 8K image. Our impressions so far are that it's impressive up to a point. While still at the starting grid, fine detail, like fences, resolve to a convincingly sharp 8K frame. Equally, any slow cornering holds up well in the upscale to 8K, while the game's HUD and menus look as sharp as you'd hope. The effect does break a little while in motion, however. It degrades, though it's unclear how much of this is owed to the quality of the TAAU reconstruction or the display we demoed it on. Impressively though, the 8K mode also engages DDGI, and Codemaster states that it's potentially looking into getting PSSR in place as the upscaler of choice in the future, if possible. Even with TAAU though, the first impression is a good one, and we'll have more to say on PS5 Pro's 8K support when the console lands.
Interesting.
The outlook for F124's PS5 Pro support is encouraging, even a few weeks ahead of the console shipping globally. Practically speaking, Codemasters targets the ray tracing technologies that show off best while in gameplay: reflections, ambient occlusion, and DDGI, with an at times transformative impact on the quality mode. The other big success is that 60 FPS is kept in place for this mode, and thanks to PSSR, a 4K image is still viable using reconstruction. It's a very solid early use case for PS5 Pro then, as a way to demonstrate its core features. And even if PSSR hasn't yet rolled out to all modes in F124, it's already proving to be a handy tool for developers to use, to assist in optimizing for features like ray tracing. There will be much more to say on PS5 Pro updates in the coming weeks, but that's all from me today.
So there it is, F1 2024. That was very encouraging and very enlightening to me. Really pleased with those modes. I'm not convinced by the 8K mode at all, but hey, it's better to have it there than not have it, I suppose, for the few people with a 8K display. But for me, the fact that we can run 60 frames a second with those ray tracing modes with decent quality is really nice, and I'm very much looking forward to that game. Well, there's a video. If you enjoyed it, it'd be really cool if you bash that like and subscribe button. It really does help. But most of all, thanks for watching. Catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.